Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. This is Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And we have a couple cool things to hit on today before we launch into our story time. Story time with Jody and Elliot.
A completely different
you know what I was just reminded of at the what was the lady with the magnifying glass at the end of the romper room?
Romper room. I had Miss Sally, but there was another one. I think it might have been her daughter. There was somebody else, but yes, Miss Sally.
All I remember is my name was never said.
Oh, and they said romper stomper. They didn't say Jody. They never said Elliot.
Never.
But they never said Jody.
Oh God, no. Are you
Really?
kidding? No. I'm solidly in that zone of people who like when you see the displays at tourist traps of like keychains and shot glasses and license plates. Like there's never a Jody.
Well, I knew there was no Jody with an I, but I assumed there would be a Jody with a Y.
No. Anyway.
Okay.
Well, now we've covered the important things. All right. So a couple quick important things. One, we want to welcome a new member to the Facebook group. I'm hoping I'm not saying your name incorrectly. Raul Silva. Raul is hailing from Brazil. So now in addition to Nils from Sweden, we have Raul from Brazil.
And if I remember my geography correctly, and I think I do, they're practically neighbors.
Nice. So welcome, Raul. It's great to have you. And if you want to check out the Facebook group, the easiest way to get there is to go to sohere'smystory.com and click on the Join the Conversation link. And you can also, while you're there, you can check out our very special not published episode that's a little snicker worthy. And that's down at the bottom for the bonus episode. Or an even easier way to get that is just text the word story to 345 345. Unfortunately, that only works for US and maybe Canada listeners, but otherwise you can get that right on the website. That works for everybody.
Yep, it does.
So, quick sort of logistical note. There was a weird iTunes glitch for a little bit. It's been fixed, but it doesn't seem to be matriculating through all of the systems. Episode 44, which is called Your Core Competency, was playing episode 43, which was the one about words going awry for a while. We fixed it, but in a couple platforms, if it goes ahead and already downloads it, it's not re-downloading it. So anyway, just know there is another episode out there. We did not submit the same one twice. So just wanted to kind of put that out there. Yeah. And episode 44 is about the core competency is really good. So don't miss it.
Yeah. And I'm sure probably by the time this gets out to the public, it will all have been resolved.
Well, I'm sure that lots of people are just sitting around going, where's my episode?
Where is it? Yes.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so what's next?
Well, let me thank our sponsors.
Okay.
So thank you as always to Tom Loveland at Mind Over Machines, to Cat's Copy, to the architecture firm of GWWO, and to Marycraft Staffing and HR Solutions. We really appreciate the support.
We do. Oh, and one more thing before the story. We have Second Thoughts.
Second Thoughts.
So our second thoughts this time actually don't come from us.
No, it comes from our podcast community.
It does, which is exactly what we wanted.
Correct.
There's a lot of fun conversations going on in there. There really are. We're just starting. But so this one comes from Julie Gabrielli. Yeah. Do you want to fill him in on the...
Well, we were talking about, in loose terms, what people do to get themselves out of a bad mindset or escape a stressful situation, how they get past that.
And I will say that thread alone is reason to come join the community and check it out, because there are some really interesting suggestions that people do to kind of exercise these things out of their head that I had never thought of.
There are. Now, I also like Raul's taking a firm stance on paper clips versus staples.
Different thread.
But Julie's video was great. She posted a video that talked about how biologically, even prey animals and some predators get rid of their stress. And it's a really interesting video. It points to some interesting links. And I'm not going to go through the whole conversation here.
Oh, okay. You're not even going to go like a little tidbit?
No, I think people should check out the conversation.
Okay.
I think it involves polar bears. Okay, that's all.
Okay. I'm not going to. Okay. I just want for the record to know that I would tell you if it was up to me. I would at least give you a hint. But
you can give a hint.
It involves shaking. Can I at least say that?
Okay. It involves shaking.
I won't say anything more.
Okay. All right.
Shaking polar bears.
Shaking or convulsing.
All right. Let's move on.
Okay. Let's move on. Now, do you have a story?
I do.
Okay. It's all yours.
So here's my story. And it's not even really entirely my story, but that's part of the reason it's why I wanted to use it as the story today. And I'll warn you, it's not the happiest of stories, but that is part and parcel at the core of what about this feels really, really important to me. So this goes back in time a tiny bit to when I was working on Andrea Lee's coaching team, and which was a really pivotal part of a lot of things that I kind of landed in and honed in on in my business. And I mentioned that because this lesson that's kind of coming back around for me now harkens back to something that I learned from Andrea that she is really a master of, and it's something that I have really only even, I think, ever seen her teach and model this well. So And that has to do with ending things well, in as importantly and with as much celebration as you begin them, which I think is a very, that sentence probably makes sense. It's not that I think that sentence is that categorically unintuitive, but the context in which she uses it and the way in which she uses it has been really important for me. But that's not the story. Here's the story. While I was working with Andrea, when I first joined her team, we did these events a few times a year. And one of those times, we would bunk up with each other because we didn't each need our own individual room while we were doing these like 3 and 4 day retreats for the people that we were leading these coaching programs for. And they were business retreats for people to work on their businesses. And so I one time got to room with Chelsea Burler, she handled all the marketing for Andrea. She was also an event coordinator. And I'd known of Chelsea for years and years and years because as long as I had known Andrea and been in her programs, Chelsea was that person. And she sort of had a little bit of this icon status to me. I'd seen her teach from the stage about some particular things. I'd also just seen her doing her work, and she put on these fabulous events. And what I knew about Chelsea already before I got to room with her that weekend is, and I think you'll know what I mean, there are just some people who just have something about them, some kind of like magic about them that you just instantly feel good around them. I don't know exactly what that is, but Chelsea's one of those people where it's not that she's super like, I don't know, gregarious or something. It's just, there's something about her that makes, she's got a great smile. She's kind. She's funny. She's incredibly successful and impressive at a very young age. She built this very, very successful business. I mean, I'm talking like in your 20s. And then I roomed with her, and I just, and that's the extent of my experience of like, I almost can't say, I feel almost a little bit weird saying she's my friend because we didn't spend a ton of time together, but we did spend this like 3 days rooming together. And I just love her. She's just a neat person. So here's the not fun part of the story. Last year, she was diagnosed with cancer, and she's been writing about that experience beautifully on the Huffington Post. There's 3 or 4 blog posts there. And just a couple weeks ago, she posted something on Facebook, again, a very beautiful, beautiful, worth reading piece about how she was supposed to be having her surgery that day after a couple rounds of chemo, and that the week prior it had been canceled because they've realized that it has spread to her brain and her spine. And so it's inoperable. And this is the part that feels really important to me because Chelsea explicitly says, what I don't want here is your pity, that this is not what I really want to enjoy. We're working hard. I think what she says, we're working really hard to enjoy every minute that we have. And in the weeks since then, I have watched her, like old pictures and mention like really great experiences. I see her posting really lovely pictures with friends. And Chelsea, more than anyone I know, is, wow, I'm doing a really good job of not just like getting super emotional. I'm like, fight it back. She's doing this really amazing and fascinating. I'm just really moved by her very intentional and conscious choice of how she wants to spend this time that she has. And the reason that it's important to come back to Andrea on this is that Andrea had this theme that would come up in our business coaching quite often about how you end things, and that ending things, and this is where I want to talk about why, because I'm sure some people were like, what does this have to do with business? This is not a happy story. But I really want to challenge that perspective of just sort of like falling into the sadness of it. That is actually the point. So when Andrea would be talking to someone who is considering closing their business or letting someone go or ending a partnership, she always had this thread in there of ending as well as you started it. So she herself actually shut down a business that she had been doing for quite a number of years. And she, instead of having the ending be this thing that's like a tapered off, like wah, 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 into fizzled nothingness, she really focused on actually ramping up towards the end. And like, how do you want to celebrate everything that this was? And that just because, and maybe this is kind of the stepping off point to where I'll let you speak for a minute, is how, like, ending it with as much, actually, I lost my train of thought when I cracked that joke. Ending it with as much joy as you started it, and that ending doesn't have to be entirely a sad that was my point. That just because something's ending doesn't, that kind of rewriting that story, that things can have finite periods of time, that they can be like a chapter that closes, and that doesn't necessarily mean failure or that something is bad, or I don't know. I just want to explore this topic of ending things well, because I think not being able to do that makes people hold on to things longer than they should.
Well, I think that there are two different paths. One is the path of saying that what you're thinking of as an ending may ultimately not turn out to be that way. And you know,
I'm not sure I quite follow that.
There's a sports analogy that if you studied martial arts, for example, what they tell you when you are going to strike something, when you're going to throw a strike, is that you're going to aim for hitting the wall behind the person. So you continue that motion through the object, through what would theoretically be the end of your motion. You just look beyond it as if you're going to continue that motion beyond the target, which is a weird analogy. But what I see a lot of times is that you have business people that stop this particular company or stop this particular endeavor. And there's all of that emotion and all of the ritual and all of the outreach that surrounds stopping something, only to come back and realize that in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, well, wait a minute, there was something we can take with that. We can revive part of that. We can repurpose what we did. And then they didn't really wind up ending it. They just put it on hiatus.
Sure. Okay.
And I think a lot of times we think of it as a binary choice. You're actually actively doing something, or it's done.
And then there's no point of no return.
And there's a point of no return, so you end. And so the point down that path, the point of finishing as well, if not better than you started, is one of preservation, because it may not be an end. It may just be a halt.
Gotcha.
It may just be a pause. And then the other part of it is when it really is an end. And so you go back in public speaking, certainly in working as a trial lawyer, and they talk about recency and primacy in your message. So primacy is the first thing that you say. Like if you appear in front of a jury, the first thing you say, or in front of an audience, what are those 5 seconds, 10 seconds going to be? Because people remember the first thing that you say. But then there's recency, which is the most recent thing you said before you left the stage, you know? So it's the last thing that you said. And so it sounds trite, but the question really is not just the memories that you want, but how do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as a company that, well, of course they went out of business because the last meal I had at this restaurant was horrible.
Right.
And I have an example of that, but I won't get into the story right now. But it taints everything. You might have had 16 really good meals at the restaurant over a 5-year period, but you went there because they were going out of business. And let's just go back there for old time's sake. And it was horrible.
Right.
Well, that's what you remember.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a surprising number of times I have clients who want to talk about the possibility of shutting down their business or putting it on pause or these kinds of things. And honestly, very rarely does that end up where the conversation heads, where the conclusion of it ends. But two things. One, I think exploring that when it feels like the thing to do is super important. Just it kind of goes back to the exercising it. If you don't, it's like there's a reason it's swirling in there. So let's look at it. But two, I think there's like a weird, I don't even know, like a weird hang up on ending or quitting things. And I think about this a lot with parenting. Obviously, I want my kids to learn to be committed to things and see them through and stick with it and, push through the hard times. Like that is absolutely, or, you've made a commitment to something. So, finish it. I don't disagree with any of that. And I spend a lot of time talking with grownups who don't have the skills of how to end things that no longer serve them. Like there's a balancing act to that skill set that's also when to say, this isn't the right thing anymore. It's not the right partnership. It's not the right business. It's not the right product line. It's not the right fill in the blank with a million nouns, knowing when to go, nope, no more of that, and stop. And frankly, quit. Well, quitting is an art.
I think it is an art. And I think the first part of that is to realize that there's nothing that's really unthinkable in your realm. If you start with, well, I can't shut down this company because that's unthinkable, then you foreclosed a whole bunch of options. Right. Now, and I'll give you an example just on the personal side, not the business side. My son was having a really difficult time with certain things in college. He's a freshman at University of Colorado. And so we were talking about this, and he said in this really hesitant voice with all of these preambles, I'm not thinking about not going to college or leaving college. I'm not thinking about transferring out of school. I'm not thinking about, and he listed like this whole laundry list of things that he wanted to assure me he wasn't thinking about before he wanted to give voice to whatever doubts he was having. I said, okay, well, we can think about things. I may have opinions and you may, but everything's on the table. Yeah. What would that look like? Mm-hmm. And so when I talk to people like you have, people who may be in the back of their mind thinking maybe this isn't the right business or product.
I call them the burn it down days. Like sometimes it's legitimate and sometimes it's just like, it just needs to be a fantasy that you like play out.
But but playing it out is legitimate. Yeah. I think that you run into a problem when you start telling yourself that when you don't even question what you consider to be unthinkable. Mm-hmm. If you label this unthinkable and you don't even question whether it truly is, right, then I think that's the real problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And that gets at the heart of it. Like, so there's really two things in this story, and I want to make sure we hit on both of them. Like I started on the piece about ending well, but there's a prerequisite, a precursor to that, which is just allowing endings to be thinkable, to let them be okay as a thing, because if they're not, then you don't even then you'll only have the path of like, you have to sort of Eeyore through endings because if you get that route, it's, it's somehow because you had no other choice or something. But along those lines.
I love that Eeyore is now a verb.
You're Eeyoring? Yes. It was actually really hard to say.
Eeyore through things.
But there's a TED Talk, and I'll have to find it. It's I don't know why I remember that it's 12 minutes long, but it's a TED Talk about another way to think about love, I believe is something, a better way to think about love, maybe, I think is what it's called. And she talks about how different relationships would be if we imagined them as a collaborative work of art, that if you literally think of two people working on a canvas, there may or may not come a time where you step back and say like, no, that's good right there. Like that's fine. It's done and it's okay and it's good and it's beautiful. And that if that time comes, that it's not necessarily sad or bad or wrong to say like, and scene, that's okay. And it was just, and she's not suggesting that that you jump from relationship to relationship. That's not the point. It's more what we're saying about having things not be unthinkable, that if you find a way that you are continuing to choose them, whether it's your business or a partnership of any kind, allowing that conversation to be a conversation means that you're choosing it every day versus some sort of weird, like obligatory path. And that's where I think it gets really dangerous.
Well, what I really like about that, I mean, if you take it from the realm of the TED Talk on a different way to think about love and just substitute the word business for love, you may, if your company, if your organization, if your product line, if your initiative, if your endeavor is a collaborative work,
exactly,
there may be some time that you step back and you think, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And
that's good.
Done.
Yeah.
But as you're finishing it up, if you realize that it is almost finished, but you still are going to add a few more brush strokes until the end, you're going to take just as much care on those brush strokes, because if you don't, the work is ruined. I
think that's why I have been so inspired and emotional about observing and being inspired by Chelsea in these past few weeks, is that is how it feels. She truly is crafting this piece of artwork that is her life. And she's being very deliberate with her brushstrokes in a way that I find immensely moving and empowering. And it is certainly how to me, it's not just about how you want to live life. Like, I want to take this thing that she's modeling, and I want to do everything in business that way, and in parenting and in my relationships. It feels like a really important thing to me that goes way beyond just simply the life you want to live, which odd that I'm using that as like the simple version of something. Usually that's sort of like the top version of something. But anyway, you'll bear with me on my weird metaphors here.
Well, but as you were saying that, it reminds me that, going back to the painting, there's a movie that was very underrated by starring Robin Williams called What Dreams May Come. And the story involves he's married and they have 2 children. And one of them dies, and then he dies. I mean, this is very early on. Mm-hmm. And anyway, there's a scene where she, as the surviving member of this family, is painting a picture. And she's so caught up in depression. What is the graphic representation of depression is that she's painted this beautiful landscape, but then she takes a black brush and she just puts it on the canvas, and you see the dark paint start to color this work. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think of a lot of times. Even if, so bring it back to something concrete, you're finishing up with this business, maybe because you just have had it up to here with these people, whether those people are your customers or your coworkers, whatever. But if you may have created something great and you're just tired, you're just ready to move on for whatever reason. But if you give everyone the collective finger, if you stop returning calls, if you don't honor their requests, if you don't follow up with them, if you don't tell them what's happening, if you just stop without honoring their stake in whatever it is you're doing, you're taking that work of art and you're dabbing it in black paint, dabbing your brush in black paint, putting it at the top and letting the paint just drip down and color everything you've done. Yeah. I mean, to me, so I was involved in a sort of like a networking group thing that a friend of mine started. And the intent was to have a group of people that we all respected each other, to get to know each other and to build relationships that we could then become referral partners for each other or whatever. So not a like show up and pass out 30 business cards each week thing. Right. We met like once a month, and it was fantastic for like a year. And then like people started not coming, and, and it was less over. And some people were like, well, this isn't working. I guess it's kind of failed. And I was, in my perspective at that point, I was actually facilitating it. I said, no, actually, it's just served its purpose. We now know each other, and we now meet each other on our own and refer each other independent. Like it's done. So let's go out with a bang. Let's have like a happy hour and toast the fact that we
We did what we wanted. We created the outcome that we wanted to do. We don't need to meet monthly. There's just this weird trap of like, if something doesn't last forever, then it's failed. And I really would love to plant some seeds to rewrite that story.
Yeah, to me, it's like you can look at it as I don't know whether you ever watched this. I certainly did when all the space shots and early on the moon shots were on television, but I'm a lot older than you are. But but what fascinated me were the pictures of when the first stage of the rocket had expended all of its energy and it decoupled and it dropped off. And you could say that, if you looked at it as a business, you could say, well, it failed, but it didn't fail because it got them where they needed to go. It finished its function, and then it was allowed to separate.
Yes. Yeah. So that is a great, so metaphor doesn't quite, because it doesn't necessarily need to include separation. But, for some founders of companies, there comes a point where you need to call in a CEO, you need to replace yourself as founder, because there are skills that have to do with scaling that don't have to do with the same skill set. Like someone who's great at scaling could have never started this thing from scratch. They didn't have the seed of the idea and the passion that a founder does to actually build something from nothing. But then there comes a point in scale where sometimes, not always, it makes sense. And it doesn't mean that person has failed. It's just that the variables have changed. The soil has changed and it needs something else.
I'll tell you, the first client that I worked with in starting this firm, in fact, when I was debating what to do with that stage of my professional career, I got this call from this client and I took the assignment. I guess, I guess I'm starting this firm. And that was 16 years ago. But I really got to know this company and I really admired this company because they were on the second generation. So the first generation started it. It became a big company. Second generation took over and they worked at it for decades. And it became an even bigger and more successful company. But then they brought in a CEO. And both of the second generation, who were actually sons-in-law of the founder. One was a son, the other was a son-in-law. So both of them, who worked side by side very, very closely day in and day out for 20 years, decided, you know what, in order to take this company where we need it to go, we need somebody with a skill set of a CEO to take it there, and we don't have that. And I always had and they didn't step out of the business, by the way. They still continued in their functions, and they were extremely vital to the purpose. But I always was so fascinated by that decision, and I admired it so much because it takes so much insight to figure that out.
This may not be true because I'm the worst history. I'm like the opposite of a history buff. I have like a colander brain for history things. But someone told me one time that George Washington, they said he's the only, but maybe he's one of the only, I don't know, that feels a little absolute, but he's the only person with that much power to voluntarily step, to hand it over, to say, he could have, I think, if I remember correctly, as they were saying at that point, it wasn't like there was a 4-year term or whatever, those rules had not been put in place yet. And he voluntarily said, I shouldn't continue to be in this.
What there was, if I remember correctly,
I was save me from talking about history.
There were 4-year terms. They had decided on 4-year terms, but what happened was he served 4-year term, was put into power by proclamation, pretty much, had his second 4-year term, and then he said,
"Gotcha,
I'm not doing it anymore." He voluntarily stepped away because he clearly could have been president for life.
Yeah.
And he decided, and that's why it became tradition, only really broken by Franklin Roosevelt. It became tradition that 2 terms was the maximum.
Gotcha.
And then when Franklin Roosevelt broke it, they put it into law that now 2 terms is maximum. It's
so funny. Just quick side note, my greatest fear in the world, truly my greatest fear, is somehow being on that cash cab show by, and suddenly the world knowing how much really basic sort of knowledge kinds of things I don't know, like history and geography and whatnot. So thank you for jumping in and saving me from.
You know that Brazil and Sweden aren't actually neighbors, right?
Shut up. I know that. That I do know. That I do. I'm not that bad at geography, but it is shocking. I probably can't name all 50 states. It's really, really bad. I want to we've been talking a lot about, it's really interesting. I was afraid with this story that like, it was one of those, like, I wonder if we won't have anywhere to go with this, but now I have like so many things I want to say. I just want to hit on like one or two last ones as we need to wrap up here. But, we've been talking about this in terms of like this bigger picture of like ending a company or a product line, which absolutely apply, but they may not be as applicable in the everyday. But as I mentioned earlier, just even the more, I won't say day-to-day, but more typical thing of needing to let someone who works for you go, needing to let someone go. One of my favorite, and I think we have mentioned this before, I just recently met with my friend Scott Turnball, who I heard this phrase from, and he let me know that this is actually, he heard it from Paul Ricks. So that's really who gets the credit here. But it's this phrase, and it's not that the phrase itself it's the sentiment behind it. It's kind of the come from about when it's time to help someone move on. And it goes something like, the time has come for us to help you succeed somewhere else. Which sounds a little tongue in cheek. And so that like, you don't have to put the words that way, but this idea of it's when it's not a right fit, like, I love you too much to let you stay here in this not right fit. Like, let's find the right place for you, and it's not here. Okay,
but there are two aspects of that. The first one, I'm sure there are more, but these are the ones that occur to me. The first one is, you have to separate it from being just this glib statement to being to something being true.
Yeah.
So if you say the time has come to let us help you succeed somewhere else, then you actually follow through and you help them succeed somewhere else. The second part of it is that you play to the echo of the whistle. In other words,
wait, I have to process that. You play
to the echo of the whistle.
I have no idea what that means.
What that means is that until the very, very last second, so that if you say to somebody, the time has come for us to help you succeed somewhere else, so your last day is in 2 weeks. You don't spend those 2 weeks ignoring them as if they've been shunned from your community.
Exactly.
You have to, as I said, play to the echo of the whistle. The last, when they leave, it's got to be as a valued member of the team that's leaving.
Yeah.
But if you're going to have them there, then you've got to make that ending just put as much effort into that ending as you did into the onboarding.
This is why I love this topic. So one of my, he's a past client, but has actually became very much of a mentor for me in the way he led. This is the culture that he builds at his company. We talked through multiple times where he had conversations with people saying, this isn't really working. We both know that. Let's take the next couple months. You look for jobs. I'll be a reference. I'll put out feelers for you. We'll interview for other people. Let's take this time for both of us to find a new person. Maybe even you train. It can be, doesn't mean the person's like, great, they're not always like super, super, super happy, but they sure are a lot less unhappy than if you do it in this way where, there's just this weird sort of story we have that if it's time to let someone go or move on, that it has to be this like, well, you're fired kind of thing. And it doesn't. There's another way to go at it.
So as you said, we have to wrap up. So as we wrap up, I just want to say, shameless self-plug, the conversation does not have to end here.
Oh, as we talk about endings?
As we're talking about endings.
How do we end well?
Yes. So it doesn't have to end here. And I mean this in all seriousness because I love the conversations that take place in our Facebook community group.
No, it really is becoming a conversation.
And it is. And so that's where the conversation continues. Yeah. So our conversation behind the mics might end on this topic for now. But I hope it continues in the Facebook group.
We'll see you there.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group.
Which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts.
Your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village,
Yes, it does.
we'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of
Lovingly
ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Including wrangling us.
Which is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.